Hello, welcome back to the Business Pulse podcast. My name is Candice Jarrett. Today we are joined by Dr. Kevin LaGrandeur, and we're going to be talking about all things AI, including the ethics of AI, right here on the Business Pulse podcast. This is the Business Pulse podcast, where you'll discover strategies, tools, and stories to inspire success through conversations with leading business owners, startup founders, and venture capitalists. Our aim is your success. Presented by XKOVA, a next-generation payment processor to help your business thrive. Visit us at xkova.com. Hi, Kevin. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, good to be here.
So I want to talk first about the Global AI Ethics Institute. How did you get involved with that? And what does the Global AI Ethics Institute do?
The way I got involved with it is I've been publishing on AI for a while, a little over a decade, and on intelligent technology for about 30 years. So people find my stuff and then they contact me. And I also talk a lot at conferences. So the guy who's one of the two people who started the Global AI Ethics Institute, a French guy named Emmanuel Goffi, he found me somehow and he had read my stuff. He also has a background in AI ethics. And so he asked me to join the group. I did. And then he got a big time job in Paris and had to quit as a leader. And he asked me to move up into the board of directors. And that was all in a 1 year time span. And then he wanted me to run the institute. And I said I didn't want to do that. And so he asked me to be the research director. So that's what I do. So I've been with the group for about 2 years now. It's a startup and it's international, was based in Paris, now based in Croatia.
So I know that you have given talks in front of EU Parliament in 2023. Is that part of what you do with the Institute, or is that separate?
That was actually separate. What the Institute does, the Institute's devoted to expanding what we think of as ethical concepts when we talk about AI. Because right now, most of the ethics that we use to think about AI is just Western ethics, that is European philosophy. So Emmanuel wanted to start a group that would try to tap into Eastern philosophies and other philosophies, Hinduism, Shintoism, Buddhism, and so forth. And so that's our mission, is to get into our institute people from all over the globe, including the global South, that is, like Southern Africa, South America, to variegate the types of ethics that we use when we talk about AI. So that's what the Institute's about. The EU thing, again, they just stumbled onto my stuff, I guess, and suddenly I got an email one day from one of the heads of the Green Party in the EU asking me to address them over a sort of Zoom type thing like this for one of their meetings, because they wanted me to talk about, they were debating whether or not to adopt this set of AI regulations that ultimately were adopted this past year. They wanted to know how I thought AI and the regulations proposed might affect jobs. I have a whole book on that called Surviving the Machine Age, published in 2017, where I put it together with a partner, and it's all about how AI and intelligent technology might affect employment and what solutions we could see for that kind of thing. So that's what I talked about at the EU Green Party meeting. And so I talked about 15 minutes there. Their technology didn't work very well. I ended up doing it over the phone.
So that's amazing that you wrote a book about this in 2017, because I feel like even though obviously people have been making strides and working in AI for a long time, it's really only very recently become part of the mainstream public consciousness. So, and especially the fear and concern about jobs and what AI is going to mean for jobs. So can you give us, I guess, you touched on so many amazing things. I also want to ask you about the difference in ethics from different cultural points of view. So let's go with the jobs first, and then I'll circle back to ask you about the different points of view. So do you feel that AI is ultimately a threat to jobs, or how do you feel AI is going to impact jobs, and what do governments need to do in order to maybe step in, if anything?
Well, nobody has a crystal ball, right? So I can't exactly say what's going to happen in the future, but I have a few bets I'm willing to place based on my research. So I also have a degree in economics in addition to the English and philosophy and background in technology, I kind of have a wandering mind. So there's an economic theorist named Joseph Schumpeter, and he identified a phenomenon he calls creative destruction in economics that happens every time there's an industrial revolution. And we're in the fourth industrial revolution right now, which is based around AI. But the previous ones, the steam revolution was the first one, for instance. They all caused jobs to go away at first. But then after about a generation, about 20, 25 years, the people who grew up with that particular technology developed even more jobs to replace the jobs that had gone away. So, for instance, turn of the century, 20th century, you had the automobile and gas-powered engines, and it killed buggy whip makers' jobs, horse and carriage people's jobs, and that kind of thing. But those people eventually were able to work at Henry Ford's factory for more money than they would have earned making buggy whips. So he said, and he gives good evidence. This has happened 3 times already in history, at least. So history tends to predict the future. Since historically that's what's happened, but then I think that's what's going to happen with AI. It's going to destroy a lot of jobs in the near term, but in the long term, it'll provide even more jobs. It'll just take different types of training. And I think people are going to have to now get a college degree just to get, a basic job. That's one, I think, effect of it, is that more education will be necessary. Now, what's going to happen? Where will that leave? One of the things we talk about in the book is, where will that leave people who just don't have the capacity to study more? There are people who don't go to college because A, they're not interested, and B, they don't have the type of mind that works well learning stuff in school. They want to go and be a car mechanic or a carpenter. So there are a bunch of alternatives that we propose. One of the things we note is that carpenters aren't going to go away because AI can't build a house. That's complex human activity that takes prehensile thumbs and a couple of hands. And they have a company in Australia, and this is just one example, make an automatic bricklaying robot that doesn't even use AI, but it can make nice brick walls, but not anything complex. You still need a human to run that machine. So anyway, I don't think certain jobs are going to be doable by AI. For instance, any kind of construction job that's complicated, like a master electrician, master carpenter, things like that, those aren't going away. But I think the middle management jobs are what are going to go away. If you're somebody who runs a team of people that do online research, you probably won't be needed because that research will be done by AI. So did I answer the question?
Yes. So I want to ask a couple things. So you had mentioned that you think that the emergence of AI is going to make people need more education, at least in the short term. Do you think that education itself could be replaced by AI? Like, will colleges go away and AI be like a learning curriculum?
No, again, that's a complex human job. It entails person-to-person connections. If I was a teacher for 40 years, I quit to do this. When I was teaching, AI could answer a direct question, but an AI won't be able to look you in the face and think she doesn't understand what I'm saying. And I can tell by your face, whether or not you understand me, and then explain a little further. And so the interactions would be much more flat and two-dimensional with it, AI. I think AI can provide good tutorials depending on how much tutoring somebody needs. If it's just like when I took economics classes, I would get stuck on a concept and I would go home and scratch my head and go, I just don't understand that concept of, that macroeconomic concept of XYZ. And I had a roommate who was a straight A student in economics. So I would simply go over to him and say, hey, could you explain to me this one concept here? And he would sit down and go through it with a pencil. That's the kind of direct question thing that I could have used an AI for. But if somebody needs a lot of help in something more than just one solitary concept, AI is just not that good yet. And There's, before you even ask, the whole concept of artificial general intelligence, that is an AI that's human level.
I wasn't going to go there yet,
All
but
right,
yeah.
but I'm just going to say I'm very skeptical about that.
Yeah. I'm wondering how attitudes will change. So this will let us circle back into the different cultures perceiving AI. Obviously, our attitude toward cars has changed since the horse and buggy, and our attitude toward news with like the invention of the printing press. So as the world shifts, we kind of just accept that that's the way the world has always been. So eventually, humans will be in a world where there's never not been AI. And so I wonder, like for us, maybe we're holding on to the way things are, saying like a human can't be replaced in these instances. Maybe because at some level we feel that it's wrong to replace a human, to just replace a human because it's not just like the horse and buggy, right? It's in every single industry. I don't think that there's barely any industries that will be completely untouched by AI in 100 years. So if we're thinking about it in this context, maybe eventually everything will be replaced, like a college, for example, or a teacher, even in elementary school. I mean, like the way that kids are using AI now, even for their homework when they're not supposed to. I mean, it's so tempting. So, do we need ethical boundaries in order to kind of guide humanity in a way for future generations when they don't know a world that's never had AI, so that they can be grounded somewhat in the human experience? What do you think about that?
Well, I have two answers to your first scenario, that maybe everything will be AI run in the future. Well, maybe, who knows? I'm skeptical because AI is still very glitchy, and it's not as good as people think it is. The general public, thinks it's, wow, man, this it's already like human, but it's not. It makes a lot of wrong answers and other things. So I'm skeptical, but who knows? And as for the ethics of the future, well, teaching kids is up to the parents, and teaching kids how to use any tool, even the tools we have now or tools we had 50 years ago. That's up to the parents to teach them how to use it ethically. Like my dad taught me to hunt. I grew up in Wisconsin, it's a hunting state. I was like 7 years old. He brought me to a rifle range, taught me how to shoot properly. If he hadn't done that, I might have shot my foot off, and so forth. I think the real ethical focus needs to be on corporations who make AI and how they build AI. Because if they don't build it ethically, if they take shortcuts, we're going to have big problems, because that'll affect society in a large way. How a kid down the street from me uses AI, that's not so huge an effect on society.
So an interesting thing would be, I think sometimes when a technology is as new as AI is in the broader public consciousness, that it's difficult for people to understand where the line between right and wrong is. For example, do you remember the RIAA lawsuits in the early 2000s when like LimeWire was a thing and Napster? People were downloading digital music off the internet. They didn't understand that that was wrong because they thought, I bought the CD. And so I own the CD. So that means I can rip the music off the CD and give it to my friends. Like now we understand that.
And
I
people
mean,
did
as
that before that with cassette tapes,
well,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah, mixed it with the advent of the internet and digital downloads. It was really supercharged. It's not just like burning one mixtape and giving it to your friend. One person can now be responsible for the loss of thousands of sales to the record labels and to musicians. So, everything is now, it's like, so when we look back at the previous industrial revolutions, I agree that, history is the best predictor forward. But now what's going to happen? Because what's happening is kind of maybe, I don't want to say a black swan, but I want to say that there's a lot of stars in alignment, with the internet and AI and how connected the world is now. So I'm wondering like what this is going to mean. So we'll say corporations, right? If we leave it up to corporations to decide the ethics, obviously Sony was a corporation that decided the ethics of you can't just sell our product. And they're going to sue a grandmother because her grandson downloaded it in her basement. But generally people didn't understand that that was wrong until those lawsuits happened. And then it became part of the dialogue. So what needs to happen with AI right now? I mean, even the idea of intellectual property theft is something with AI, not being compensated and training models on copyrighted data. So
Well, what needs to happen is I hate to say this, government regulation, because companies companies that are in a capitalistic system, the capitalistic system is not a moral system or an immoral system. It's simply a machine that's devoted to making money. And so since we live in a capitalistic society, the prime impetus of any corporation is to make as much money as possible. Regulations stand in the way of that. Being ethical versus just going for it and pedal to the metal stops you from making money. So corporations are always going to be incentivized to go around ethics and to not quite do the job. Like, for instance, just as a quick example, the new regulations the Biden administration put in place for AI, ethical development of AI, those are regulations were all developed by the top people in corporations that make AI. So there's a conflict of interest right there. And what they did is they put up regulations they already were doing anyway, so they wouldn't have to do anything new. And it's voluntary, so there's no penalty for not following these guidelines. That's as opposed to the EU, which is a government regulation. They have a bunch of regulations now that if you don't follow them, you get punished. So what's going to happen is the US, there's not going to be much change here. The corporation is going to plow ahead and just do what's best for their bottom line. Okay, so that's a capitalist system. A lot of it works well, but with something as dangerous, potentially dangerous as AI, and something that's moving at warp speed like AI is, that's very dangerous. At least that's my one sentence summary of how I believe is AI has a lot of huge promise, but only if we use it carefully and judiciously, which is not happening. So there are some people now who are trying. So your second question, what's got to happen?
Mm-hmm.
I hate to say this, but I think what's going to happen before anybody wants to do anything about ethics is a huge catastrophe of some kind with AI, or several huge catastrophes. Just like with nuclear bombs, we had to see it blow up before we went, holy cow, we got to do something about this. A
Mm.
lot bigger than we thought it was going to be. So that's the second thing. But I think there are already people who are corporate people, I've met them, who also believe they can be ethical in using AI or in developing companies that deal with AI. So a good example is a guy I did a podcast with this morning. He lives down the street. He has a startup called Tartle.com, Tartle. And what it is a data brokerage that does not scrape stuff off the internet for free and give it to companies to train their AI. Instead, it buys information from people like you and me. If you want to sell your information, it gets anonymized, but you sell that data to his company, and then his company sells it to companies developing AI who want to use the data to train their models.
That's brilliant. That's exactly what needs to happen.
Yes, he's a good example
Yeah.
of a corporate guy that's highly invested in ethics. He's trying to change the whole model of how data is gathered to be used as training data for AI. So this guy's name is Alexander McKeag, and you should have him on your show. I think he's a smart guy, and he's trying to do the right thing and make money. And he says he makes good money, corporation. He's one of the startup businesses here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Here in town, Santa Fe has a business incubator. And he's one of the businesses in this building of incubating businesses. So he's one example. There's another guy in the Global AI Ethics Institute. His name's Alec Crawford. He's in New Jersey, and he has his own business. He's graduated from MIT with a computer science degree, and he has a business that builds applications on top of the spine of major models like GPT-4. And his apps he sells them to businesses who want to develop and use AI ethically. The apps actually guide you in using AI ethically. It blocks you from doing certain things that are unethical and encourages you to do other things that are ethical. That's the way it's programmed. So that's another guy that's trying to do the right thing, who's a corporate guy. These are small businesses, but you know what I mean.
So I'm so glad that you mentioned that. We did actually have Alec on the show, but we hadn't talked about that aspect of what he did. So now it's got to come back.
Yeah, I mean, I saw that. I saw a
Yeah.
clip from your show, and that's how I learned part of what I just said,
Yeah.
that his focus is on developing ethical AI by selling applications to businesses that are trying to use AI that will encourage them to develop that AI ethically.
Yeah. I don't think that we had actually, and I could be wrong, but I don't think that we had dove into the idea of the AI itself guiding whether or not the use of that AI was ethical or not. We had talked largely about governments and air gapping AI, which is something that I want to dive into in just a second. I got to go back because what you said earlier about the different cultural attitudes toward AI and different baselines for what is ethical, like I guess in Asia versus in
Hmm.
Europe versus in Africa. So, can you tell me something that surprised you when you were doing this research about an attitude from a non-Western perspective toward AI?
Yeah, a good example is if you go into the Buddhist system of philosophy and you talk about developing an artificial general intelligence, an AGI, that then becomes conscious like a human. In the Buddhist system, this surprised me to read this. That would be a horrible thing because you'd be creating a suffering being. If you create an entity that's conscious, you're creating a living being, and that living being will be able to suffer. That's how we learn. And creating a suffering being is a bad thing to do in Buddhist systems. It's not, Western philosophy. It's like, hey, yay, I created life, and this thing is intelligent and really useful and could be a real helpful to mankind and blah blah blah. But then you have Frankenstein as a counterexample of that. So, but the thing is, in Western philosophy, you can see this reflected in the novel Frankenstein. In the Western philosophy, they don't worry about the suffering of that new being. We worry about whether it's going to hurt us. In the book, the creature kills all these friends of Victor Frankenstein. And that is the horrible thing that happens. But also in the story, the creature suffers. He says at several points in the novel, I do the bad things I do because I'm suffering and nobody cares. And my creator cares least of all. So it's a sort of violent sort of ethics that we have based on reactions that are violent. In the Buddhist system, it's about love. You don't want to create a being that you have to then watch suffer because it's not a kind and loving thing to do.
Wow, that, that's an amazing perspective all the way around. I had never been anybody that I've talked to talked about the suffer like thought about the suffering of an AI. I've seen it in fiction. Like there's a book that I had mentioned to you just before we started our podcast. That's called Scythe by Neil Shusterman, and it's about many things, but it's about a utopia where an AI has solved all of mankind's problems. And over the course of the three novels, the AI does start to become artificial general intelligence. It does become self-aware and it does suffer. Seeing what people do to each other brings it pain. So I think that, there are a lot of ethical concerns about AI, I mean, within the West and outside of the West, but I don't believe that anything is going to stop AI because I think that too many corporations, governments, and even people on an individual level feel that this is the best way forward for humanity. So,
Yeah, that train has left the station.
yes,
I would never promote trying to stop AI or stop development of AI. For one thing, developing technology can be a good thing. The automobile is good in a lot of ways. It kills a lot of people, but that's our fault. Talk about ethical development of a piece of technology. We haven't developed it in such a way where we put an emphasis on safety. We're starting to now, like 100 years too late, but that's just the way humans tend to think. At least that's what I believe. And I think that the only thing I can do is try to promote um, ethical and judicious and careful use of AI. Because we're not going to stop that train. We got to get on it at the right point.
yes. Oh, I like the way you said that. At what What capacity do you feel, in your personal view, is ethical for an AI to have authority over a human life? So, for example, like an AI driving a car. I mean, the AI
Yeah.
has control over the person's life in the car and also the pedestrians on the street.
So there's an old saying that lawyers use that a person who decides to defend himself in court has a fool for a lawyer. I think a person who decides to let a car drive completely by itself has a fool for a driver, which is a fool for a passenger, maybe, which is the human. I mean, this is complicated, but I think it's the ethics. First of all, the ethical problem is humans is a human problem, not a machine problem. The humans make the choice to let that car drive itself. So it's incumbent upon the humans who create that self-driving car to make it safe. And right now, it's also incumbent upon them not to overhype the ability of that car to drive itself. I just published an article in a journal called AI and Ethics a year ago where I complain about the fact that there's overhyping of AI going on. I like a lot of it. Businesses all want to say, I have AI too. So they, first of all, they exaggerate. They have software and they call it AI and it's not. Or worse, somebody like Elon Musk, and this is public knowledge, so I'm not slandering him. He insisted on calling his self-driving technology autopilot, which implies that it can do everything by itself, just like autopilot on a plane. You can hit a button and the plane flies itself. The car doesn't do that. It's got flaws that don't allow a human to hit a button and then go to sleep. That's how people die. And in fact, there have been a number of deaths because people did that, because they think it's a full self-driving package. One guy hit the self-drive button on the autopilot on a Tesla, and he started doing something else. And he didn't realize the sensors on Teslas aren't built high enough to detect a truck. So he
Yeah,
went sliding underneath the truck and beheaded himself, died.
horrible.
And there's a whole bunch of things like that because technology has glitches. The cars don't have enough sensors for everything. And people overestimate the capability of that particular AI. And it's Musk's fault because he encourages that overhyping. He insisted on calling it autopilot against the advice of other people.
I think that because technology has come about so fast, like the world has changed completely from when I was a little girl, like as far as technology is concerned. And so I grew up at such an interesting time where I was a teenager, really, when people started using the internet. So I remember like the world before it, but I was also young. So I saw people adopting it very rapidly. And even now, not that many years later, people can't use technology responsibly. Like we say that like earlier we talked
I
about
can
how
have a ton of examples for that.
yeah. We talked about how the onus is on the parents to teach children to use AI responsibly when parents themselves have difficulty using any technology, far be it from AI, like a smartphone. Like it was,
Or they use it and they use it irresponsibly
that's what I mean. They use it
themselves.
irresponsibly.
Yeah. Here's a good example. My latest grinchy feelings are about people who it seems to become the thing now. People play videos on their phones on speaker and really loud. So the whole room, if you're in a waiting room for a doctor, you can hear everybody playing videos.
Yes.
And it's like,
Or in an airplane.
what happened to a headset, or what happened to putting it on quiet, yeah, or putting it up to your head when you're on a phone conversation instead of going around like this and having this loud conversation everybody can hear in a
Mhm.
restaurant, you know? Though that's totally unethical. You're interrupting everybody else's good time because you want to watch a video, and you're too lazy to put in a $20 set of headphones.
When I was walking out of the grocery store a couple months ago, and a young woman in a Tesla was backing up, and she was texting as she was backing up, and she almost hit me. And I jumped back and I look at her like, you've got to be kidding me. In that moment, she looked up and she waved to me like, oh, thank you for letting me back out. No, you almost ran me over.
It could have been an "oh sorry" type of wave, but
No, I could tell it was like, oh, yes, I'll just be a minute backing up now. Like, she was kind of like nonchalant about the whole thing.
there's
And
a
I
lot
was
of cool
standing right next to her window. I was like right there. And maybe she
technological
didn't.
advancement. It shows
Yeah.
you technological advances don't make people any better at doing
No.
certain
Yes.
things.
And so like also you see a lot of this was really heartbreaking actually. So social media is one of the technological advances that people have a hard time using responsibly, especially with kids, but with adults as well. So a while ago on Twitter, when it was still Twitter, 1,000 years ago, this woman was saying that her child, maybe like an 8-year-old, had had a nightmare that they were buried alive, and that the kid was screaming for their mother, like, help me, but the mother was on her phone and wouldn't stop looking at her phone to help the child. This was the child's nightmare. So of course she put it on social media because the mother must spend a lot of time on social media. But I felt that that it was I'm glad that she did, though, because I felt it was an important warning, because
Yeah, a
obviously
lesson.
it is a very like sad and shocking reflection of like what this child's perspective is. Like, mom, I want you to look at me, not the phone.
Well, I mean, there's all kinds of things like that where people, instead of helping somebody falling off a cliff or
Take a video.
somebody getting beaten up, they go, "Oh boy, I could put this on my feed." And you have a bunch of people, especially kids, when there's a fight on the playground, they surround the fight with their cell phones
Yeah.
to get video of it and post it rather than stopping the fight.
Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff that's
So this is the generation that 100 years ago, when they look back on us, they'll say these are the people that were using AI. So, I think that as far as, ethical considerations for AI, people are probably not going to just do it themselves. I mean, I have I love people. I have, I believe that people are generally good. However, I think that sometimes people don't understand what they have and the power of the thing that they have. And without education, like, we could very easily slip into a place where people use AI as a tool that ultimately is bad or unethical, like toward the human race.
could be, but we've had that dilemma throughout history with humans at every level of technology. When we had nothing but spears, we had to teach people to be careful of spears and
Yes.
when was appropriate to use them and when it was not. And that's the same thing with anything we have, any kind of technology. And it's not just parents, but also teachers. Part of my job when ChatGPT came out was to figure out how to use. There's no way I was going to stop it. So if you can't beat them, join them. So I had to figure out how to teach people to use it responsibly and ethically. So first thing I'd say is, if you turn in something that you had ChatGPT write instead of something, if that technology did all of your writing and you turn it into me, I can tell, and you're going to get an F.
Hmm.
And I may write you up, and you might get kicked out of school. So instead, I said, okay, there's a good way to use technology. This particular technology, it's really good at taking on tedious tasks or getting you started on writing. So I would have my students do an exercise where I'd say, here's a topic, ask ChatGPT to write an outline for the topic. And it would do it in like 10 seconds. And I'd say, now take that write up, that outline, and I want you to get in a group of 4, everybody in groups of 4, and I want you to critique each other's outlines. What's wrong with the outline? And then after that, take it home, fix the outline, and do a first draft. So that's a good use of AI. It not only teaches them how to use it properly, but it has the advantage of getting you started. I do it that way. When I wrote my business proposal, I had ChatGPT write it, the first draft. I said, write a business proposal about an AI ethics consulting business, make it 1 page long. And it was a pretty good job, but it needed work. So then I had to revise it. But it saved me probably an hour and a half gnawing on my fingernails going, how am I going to start this? That kind of thing. Or going and looking up a sample business proposal online. It gave me a sample business proposal geared to me. So that was the difference. And that's what AI is good for.
So I agree. AI as a tool is an incredible thing. And I think that you had mentioned earlier that there's a danger in overhyping the abilities of AI. And I see that. And I want to ask it, like, examples of you perhaps seeing that as well, where companies get very excited about the idea of AI. And so they replace an employee with it instead of maybe giving the employee AI as a tool to make them more efficient, they're like, oh, we don't need this employee anymore. And then disaster strikes. Have you seen instances like that?
Yeah, I've seen it without technology. Offshoring did exactly that. Offshoring was the big thing 20 years ago. Oh, let's send that job to India. They could do it like for a tenth of the price. So I was in charge of the director of a technical writing program at the university I worked at. And I would go to meetings with professional technical writers to, find out what I should be teaching and that kind of thing. The big complaint at that time was they keep sending our jobs to India. And then they have us train our Indian replacements, then they fire all of us. But then they have to hire some of us back because people in India don't speak native English. That English is their second language. So they make a lot of mistakes. So then they get what they pay for, essentially. They pay a lot less, but they get flawed documents. You know, that's an example of, but it was all about money, saving money by firing people. So now what most people who study this stuff like me say is the goal to aim for isn't replacing employees, it's making a cooperative effort with technology to help employees. So cobots instead of robots, a coworker, robot, cobot. That's what we should be shooting for. Um, is cobots and co-AIs, coworkers. And that's already happening. Managers who are savvy are saying ChatGPT could help with doing spreadsheets because, you know, they're good at that kind of thing, or help with writing an initial draft of a PR document. And then we need a human to sort of inject some creativity, to correct mistakes, and to gear it toward how we want it to sound. So the upshot is you get the job done faster. Just like with computers, when they came out in the early 90s with a lot of computer software, it sped people's jobs up, which isn't a good thing all the time. But for money and for working, it's helpful to be able to write something faster with Word um, instead of typing it on sheets of paper. So it makes workers more efficient. And I think AI already is doing that because I can have AI do number crunching. I can have AI um, draft an outline for me in 30 seconds that would take me 45 minutes. And it saves me that 45 minutes so I can work from the outline to something better. So I think AI is promising in those kinds of ways. And no doubt it will reduce the need for workers. So there will be a number of workers put out of jobs, but the ones that stay with the jobs, it'll be because their managers do the right thing and use AI in conjunction with human intelligence.
Can you think of a scenario? I mean, I realize that this is crystal ball gazing, but can you think of a scenario of a type of job that doesn't exist now that might exist in 10 years because of AI?
Well, I can think of a job that would exist in next year, maybe 2 years from now, prompt engineering, teaching, having specialists in creating prompts that are most efficiently and effectively give you a good response from ChatGPT, for instance. That's a
Wow.
real skill to
Yes,
write a good prompt.
it absolutely is. And they can get very complicated prompts. I mean,
And it's,
I agree.
far-sighted people are already starting, like the other guy at my university, I quit. I got a great deal in a buyout during COVID, and it was too good to turn down. So the guy my colleague, who also works with technology, he's already started a program in prompt engineering as part of NYIT's humanities department, and he's going to do a conjoint program with the computer science department on.
I guess additionally, there could be maybe SaaSes built around AI that will provide people jobs like developers, really. I mean, if AI can't do everything.
Well, you're going to have a lot of jobs for people taking care of AI that we can't even imagine. I mean, think about it. When we had gasoline engines come in automobiles, Then you
Hmm.
had to have car mechanics.
Right.
But, people don't think that far ahead. You
Auto
can't.
glass. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, you're right. I'm very glad that you mentioned this, the idea of the different industrial revolutions and how obviously like you wouldn't need a blacksmith anymore for horseshoes, but now you're going to need somebody who can balance a tire.
Right.
And that did ultimately create a lot of jobs. You'd have to look at the
And they were
numbers.
well-paying jobs.
Yes.
Henry Ford, his idea was that he would give people jobs that paid them enough money so they could buy one of his cars. He actually said that.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah, and also cars themselves, I'm not a car person, but I know people who are car people. It has also created really a love and a community around this piece of technology. I mean, there are people who their whole life is cars. They know every single type of car that ever was made. They love classic cars, they love future cars. It'll be interesting to see how AI, maybe there will be AI enthusiasts. I already see that now with the advent of AI art. You have AI artists that people like follow, these people who are essentially prompt engineers,
Hmm.
and they love their work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, also, there's already a culture of just like there's car collectors, there's now computer collectors. They collect computers from the early days of PCs, like the early 1980s. So
Mhm.
they grab the early Apple computers, the early K-Pro computers, and those computers are now worth a lot of money on the collector's market.
'Cause
So,
they're now vintage, which I hate to admit because, like, right?
yep. Yeah, I
Now
mean, the
we're
fact that
vintage.
I can remember K-Pro computers shows my age.
Mine was Commodore 64. That was my first.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. So, we actually, went over, by about a half an hour from when we first started, but I just had such a great time talking to you. I would love to have you back on the show. I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
Sure, I'm happy to come on anytime.
Awesome. Do you want to, give the audience any parting words for, do you have any like talks coming up that people can listen to, or what is the best way for them to find out what you're doing?
Yeah, so I have a LinkedIn presence. So I usually make announcements about anything new, like say when you post this podcast, I'll then tell people on LinkedIn. Also, I post on a couple of academic websites that archive anything you do. One's called researchgate.net, the other one's called academia. But if you Google me and spell my name right, you'll get a whole raft of things that people can look at. Everything from videos, stuff I published, whatnot.
Awesome. And I will also, for the audience, include a couple links, like including the link to Dr. LaGrandeur's LinkedIn in the description of the podcast. So thank you so
Great.
much again, Kevin, for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Happy to join you.